Ham loaders, bullet casters, welcome back to my bench. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to this tour of the bullet path where we are going through the forcing cone. And if you watch my last video, you saw the importance of the forcing cone, what it can do for us, and why we need it, or possibly why we don't need it. Every firearm out there is its own thing, it's its own personality. Some will need it more than others. Now, towards the end of my last video, I started to polish up the forcing cone on my Ruger GP100 44 Special. It had been cut to an 11-degree forcing cone and it's worked great. However, there's some fairly heavy tool marks that I kind of felt like were causing some issues with leaving some real annoying little lead deposits behind that can be kind of aggravating to clean. So if you haven't watched the last video, go ahead and watch it because we're just simply picking up where we were. Yes, we used valve growing compound. That is not really a polishing agent. It's a grinding compound. So we got to be careful with it. I took it about as deep as I felt comfortable with, and I felt like we pretty well got rid of those tool marks. Now we are going to use this little polishing compound. It's a whole lot friendlier, and yes, it is a polish. There's a big difference. Grinding. Polish. All right, so now it's time to get her polished up. I'm really looking forward to a nice mirror finish if possible. So folks, I really hope you like what you see here so far with that forcing cone. Now, remember, guys, these forcing cones, the number one thing we need to make sure of is that they're smooth and that they're centered. I feel real confident that mine is centered pretty well, and I'm even more confident now that it is smooth. I mean, this thing is super smooth, folks. Just kind of take a look at that. I was a little bit worried in the last video that I didn't remove all the tool marks and I didn't want to go any deeper. And I'm glad I didn't, because after cleaning it up, I really feel like those tool marks have gone away. But we are not finished yet. We still need to apply the final polishing. So remember, with that valve grinding compound, we grinded. Yeah, I know it looks polished, but it's a grinding compound, folks. So now we're going to go with the polishing compound. So this is probably an even better shot than what I showed you earlier. Now, the last video I showed you how to put the patch onto your tool, how to use it properly. We're going to do the exact same thing, except this time we're going to use the polishing compound. So it's going to be set up the same way. If you haven't seen the last video, by all means, go back and look. I showed pretty detailed setup of how I do this. Now, some of you folks that are into hot rods or motorcycles, muscle cars, that sort of thing, you've probably heard of time or two the phrase that chrome don't get you home. Guys, I'm not doing this because I like the bling and the shininess. I'm doing it because I don't want to have to clean up lead from this forcing cone. That really is an aggravation. I don't want to have to use this Lewis lead remover tool. It's cool that I got it, but tell you the truth, I prefer to not have to use it. So, like I was saying, there are some things that we can do to make life a little bit easier. And this being a polishing compound, I'm not too concerned about going deep or cutting into it like I was with the valve grinding compound. All this is really going to do is just knock down some of those tool marks. Now, like I said, I have done this with another revolver and I didn't use valve grind compound. I just used the um, polishing compound I'm using, and it came out pretty nice. But those marks were still there. They just weren't as abrasive as they used to be. So what we're trying to do now is to make this as smooth of a transition as we can. Now we have limitations here. I mean, I'm working at home in my office, we'll call it, on a workbench and a vise. I don't have a lathe. I don't have tools to remove the barrel. I'm not a machinist. I'm handy with a thing or two now and again, but for a lot of us, we got to do our own work. And I'm all about that. I like doing this kind of stuff. This stuff right here keeps my mind moving. This stuff right here keeps me occupied. It keeps me out of trouble, folks. So we all need something like that. Now, I feel like we're probably at that point. I would really love to be able to turn this thing back and forth. It just feels like that would be helpful, but all I'll end up doing is making this little forcing cone adapter go loose, and that won't be any fun. That won't get anything done. So let's see what we have here. All right. They give you this little tool here so that you can get in there and take this thing loose when it's tight. You really do kind of need this thing to be tight. Otherwise, sometimes a little copper mesh can come loose. It part of what keeps that little copper mesh in place is actually I believe the friction fit between the press fit between the adapter and that rod that it screws into. Let's take a look at what we got here, folks. Of course, it's kind of cruddy with all that stuff hanging in there. I'm going to run an oil patch through here, and we are going to see how things shook out. And Lord willing, I did not destroy a decent forcing cone. But I just use this ballistol oil, soak up the patch real good, let it kind of get everywhere. And we're going to see what we wound up with. All right. Might need to run a couple more through there. You know what? I still see just a little bit of a tool mark in there. Like I said, you know what? I can't necessarily just pull it off and chuck it in a lathe, but I am really quite pleased with what I see so far. I'm not going to let that little tool mark that still seems to be there discourage me. I'm just not that OCD. Sometimes I can be, but I know my limits, folks. And that right there is probably my limit on polishing and cleaning up a forcing cone. So folks, here we are with this finished forcing cone polishing. Now, I gotta confess, in full disclosure, off camera, I decided to give it another shot just to see if I could get that one little tooling mark that's not even hardly visible to come off. And I used the polishing compound, not the grinding compound. I've done all I can do with the grinding compound. But I believe that polishing compound did do a pretty good job on it second time around. Maybe a third one would be better, but I just don't want to get any more carried away with it. I'm really happy with the smoothness of that forcing cone. And this is going to allow me to have a little bit better cleanup session. I really doubt I'm going to see anything extra as far as accuracy, but what I am hoping to see is that it'll be smooth like butter and lead won't be caking up against that forcing cone, which wasn't a huge deal in the first place, but it was a bit of a pain to try to clean up. It didn't build up and build up with subsequent shots. It pretty much would just get to a point and stay at that point. So once again, forcing cone, folks, if we don't have a perfect barrel and cylinder alignment, we need that forcing cone. And if we're going to have that forcing cone, it needs to be cut straight. It needs to be smooth enough that it will not be counterproductive to its own